Separation of church and state has twofold importance. It both protects the government from religious interference and it protects religion from governmental interference. And both pieces are very important. The first part, the idea that government is protected from religious interference. What that means is that when our Congress is deliberating legislation and they decide to pass a law or they decide to repeal a law, no minister or priest or rabbi or mufti or mullah or monk can come in and say, stop. You have to pass this law or you can't pass that law. Like in a country like Iran where they have the Khomeini who gets to be the supreme religious leader who then dictates what can and cannot happen in the political realm. We don't have that here. There is no religious dogma or doctrine that can determine what our government does. Can influence it because people who are clergy and believers certainly are vital citizens, but they cannot dictate it. The second part, which is equally important, is that if Karen and Petra are having a service at any church or synagogue or mosque here in Dallas, no policeman gets to come in and say, break it up. If you're having a Course in Miracles group, or you're having a Muslim group, or you're having a Buddhist group, or you're having a Jewish group or a Christian group, nobody gets to come in America and say, break it up, your religion isn't on our official list. So that's why the significance of the separation of church and state. The separation of church and state was not instituted by our founders to suppress the religious conversation. It was instituted by our founders to protect the religious conversation, to protect government from religious dogma interfering, and also to protect religion, and equally protects religious pluralism in the United States and religious freedom in the United States. Not only protects people of any faith, but also of no faith. But once again, the point here is that it wasn't meant to suppress the religious or the spiritual conversation. This is extremely significant over the last few years, where some people, I'm somebody who, I go out to dinner, go somewhere and somebody says, we're not going to talk about religion or politics. And I'm like, that still leaves me out at dinner. And so some of the most important things that we should be talking about, we're not talking about. And in fact, that itself is a crisis in this country because we have become obsessed with the ultimately meaningless. Now, the issue of the spiritual conversation, and a lot of people in the New Thought and Higher Consciousness community have also had some misunderstanding of that. This whole idea of tax exemption. Lyndon Johnson, I come from Houston, born and raised in Houston. We're here in Dallas. Lyndon Johnson was a president. He was from Texas. And he didn't like he had a war on poverty. And he very, very progressive, actually, ideals in terms of his domestic agenda. And some churches in Texas didn't like what he was doing. So this was back in the Johnson years. He just had a show of hands. That's all it was. That said that any church or religious institution that weighed in and used their pulpit for political purposes would then risk losing its tax exemption. That's all that was. This was never meant to be something that people could use as a justification on the basis of some artificial spirituality to become politically disengaged. Because let me tell you something, there is no serious religious or spiritual tradition that gives anyone a pass on addressing the suffering of other sentient beings. So, any of this business like, oh, I'm spiritual, I don't go there. There is nothing holy about complacency. There is nothing unspiritual about yelling fire if in fact the house is burning down. And for those of you who think that what we're going through right now is just so traumatizing, let me tell you something. We don't have time for you to get finished with your trauma work before you show up and save this country.